Alright, yeah, welcome back to some more Gwent. This week we're going to be taking a look at a Monster Consume deck. So this Monster Consume deck is led by the Unseen Elder. So the Unseen Elder essentially allows you to consume 3 allies, but it gets strengthened instead of boosting. So I'll explain that a little bit more for those who are less familiar with Gwent. So essentially, you play your leader down. Your leader starts with 5 strength, as indicated in the top left-hand side of the card. And when you consume an ally, what consuming essentially means is you destroy one of your own units. So let's say I kill the Arrakis Behemoth. I consume the Arrakis Behemoth, and this unit goes up, or gets boosted, by 6, essentially. So it becomes an 11th strength unit. However, the Unseen Elder strengthens instead of boosts, which actually means its base power is increased, not a temporary boost. So it's kind of like a pump spell that says this creature gets +1/+1 until the end of the turn kind of thing. However, this one strengthens, so even after it's been damaged, its base power is still equal to that, whereas this one's kind of just pumped. That's the best way to explain it, but it essentially resolves around that consume mechanic. So what we've essentially got are a couple of things to consume with. So we've got our Ekimaras. Ekimaras, when you deploy them, they enter as a 3 strength unit, and they gain resilience, and resilience essentially means they stick around until the next round as well. So you get this carryover essentially. So if I maybe make a Vran warrior really huge, let's say he's a 20 strength unit, and I win the round, our opponent passes, what I can do then is use an Ekimara to consume the Vran warrior. The Ekimara gets boosted by the Vran warrior's current power, depending on how big he is. So let's say he's 20, which means that the Ekimara is now a 23 strength unit, which has been boosted essentially, but it gains resilience, so it sticks around until the next round. So next round we start with 23 power. Really powerful effect. Ekimara can be countered in several different ways though, and I'll get to that shortly. So we're using Neckers as well. It says whenever an ally consumes a card while this unit is in your hand, deck, or on your side of the board, it gets a boost by 1. And when it dies, you get to play a Necker from your deck. So every single time we use a card with Consume, for every single Consume, these get boosted. All 3 of them, no matter where they are, unless they're in the graveyard. That is the only exception to where they're not getting boosted. So we have a Necker in our hand, and it's getting boosted every single time we consume. The Unseen Elder has 3 consume triggers, so let's say this has got 6 boost strength now. The rest of them also have 6 boost, no matter where they are, unless they're in the graveyard. So if I consumed a Necker, for example, for that 6 boost, then I would actually get a Necker out of our deck for 7 as well. So we'd be able to add power by consuming the Neckers. The biggest thing that you want to consume, though, are the Celino Harpies. So the Celino Harpies are a 4 strength unit that are agile, which means they can be placed on any row. And when you deploy them, essentially play them, you get to spawn 2 Harpy eggs to the left of this unit. It's very important that you know that's to the left as well, because placement is quite important in this game and in this deck. So it spawns 2 Harpy eggs, and the Harpy eggs are 2 1 strength units with agile. Essentially means they're just going to be played on the same row as the Celino Harpy. And when they get consumed by another unit, that unit gets an additional boost of 5. So we have our Ekimara as 3 strength. It consumes one of those 1 strength eggs, goes up to 4 strength, but then it gets an additional 5 because of the Harpy eggs boost. So actually, it's even more than that. And if you combine the Celino Harpies eggs with the Unseen Elder, you're actually strengthening him by 6 every single time you play an egg. So you play a Celino Harpy, you play the Unseen Elder, you're actually boosting him by 16? 16, yes, just off of a Celino Harpy alone. So that's pretty good. And if you don't actually consume the Harpy eggs as well, they also have Death Wish, which means when they die, you get to spawn a Harpy on a random row, and a Harpy is just a vanilla 3 strength unit. Should be noted that when the Harpy eggs are consumed, that is also a trigger of Death Wish. So you're actually spawning 2 3 strength units when you consume using the Unseen Elder. So there's a really nice combo with the Celino Harpies. These guys are pretty much just an auto-include in any monster deck because of this carryover. You play a Celino Harpy for 4, and you essentially get an extra 6 for the next round, short of your opponents using maybe Savage Bears if you're playing Skellige, that kind of thing, or even Biting Frost, which would kill these instantly, but it would also add the 3 strength units to the board as well. So, we did touch upon the Vran Warrior. We're going to touch upon him a bit more. He is probably the leader of the Consumes, short of our actual leader. He's a 5 strength unit on his own, which is not too bad as a base strength. If we're going on top decks, I'm fairly confident that's going to do a little bit of value. But when you deploy him, you consume a unit to the right. So as we mentioned, the Celino Harpies spawn to the left. You want to make sure that the Vran Warrior is to the far left so that all of the eggs spawn to the right of him, because you want him to consume those eggs because he gets the extra 6 strength essentially for consuming them, which makes him really massive. And once he's huge and our opponent's passed because they can't deal with the amount that we've steamrolled ahead, we Ekimara, we absolutely carry that power over as well. It's really good for that kind of thing. We then have Arrakis Behemoths. This was, originally I did have 3 Arrakis in the deck, but I found that we didn't have enough space for, we had a shortage of consumers, essentially. This deck consists of consumers and consumables, in a nutshell, with a few little bit of utility cards here and there. But the problem was that with the Arrakis, I actually didn't have much space left for any interaction, which wasn't too bad, but I did want to go into ranked play actually, so I wanted to make sure that I could interact with our opponent's board, so the Arrakis had to go. Doesn't stop the Arrakis Behemoth from being pretty good value nonetheless though. So it goes onto the siege row, it is 6 strength as it stands, and it deploys itself with 2 armor, which essentially puts it at an 8 strength without the actual point value, which means it survives lots of weather, lots of Alzur's Thunder, which only does 7, and it essentially, with its high power, it sticks around for quite some time. And whenever an ally consumes a card, you spawn an Arrakis, and it gets damaged by 1, ignoring the armor. So every single time you consume an ally, you get a 3 strength Arrakis and damaged by 1. So every single consume is adding 2 to the board, while also synergizing with our Neckers, which are also getting boosted, while also maybe actually eating Harpy eggs, which are also adding 3 strength. So there's lots and lots of synergy with the consuming in here. So the Arrakis Behemoth used to be a lot more powerful, because Arrakis says, when it's deployed, you play all Arrakisi from your deck. So if you had 3 Arrakis actually in your deck, in your 25, just consuming a card would actually add an extra 9 strength to the board, which was really powerful. But as I said, I wanted to make sure that we had some extra value, and also weather really, really destroys this deck sometimes, so I wanted to make sure that we combat that just a little bit better. And we added an Archgriffin for that kind of thing. So Archgriffin is a 7th strength agile unit, and when it deploys, you get to clear weather from the row on your side. So if we're playing against weather decks, it's really important that we make sure that that our strongest units aren't getting hit by weather constantly, because if they play Biting Frost at the start of the round, not all of our units are agile. So agile is depicted by this here. Not all of them have that ability. Some of them are restricted to the siege row, restricted to the melee row, for example. There's quite a fair bit of restriction in the deck, so to make sure that any row that has a lot of power on it stays clear is really, really helpful for us. That being said as well, the Arrakis only spawn on the ranged row as well, so if we spawned a ton of 3 strength units, it's very important to us that they don't hit for Biting Frost every single round, every single turn on the ranged row. So Archgriffin is a late addition to counteract that kind of thing. Before I had the Archgriffin in though, I did have the Water Hag. Beautiful premium card, very lucky to draw you. So, 3 strength unit, only allowed on the siege row, but it does come with 3 different abilities. When you deploy it, you can either, you can either add Torrential Rain, Clear Skies, or Lacerate. So, Torrential Rain allows you to apply rain on a row on your opponent's side. And rain affects every single turn at the start of your turn, damage all the lowest units on the row by 2. So essentially we can get rid of quite a big swarm strategy, for example. If our opponent's using their own Celino Harpies, we get rid of their Harpy eggs before they get a chance to use them. The lowest units, if they're tied, hits all of them as well, so it is quite useful. It depends on the matchup, of course, but a lot of the times you probably want to be doing that. But mostly she's in here for the clear skies as well. Clear all weather on your side. The only reason I'm not running another Archgriffin is just because of the extra utility. If we don't need a clear skies, then a lacerate or a rain is very useful to us. So clear skies allows us to clear all weather on all of our rows as well, which is much better than the Archgriffin as well. Archgriffin only removes the weather on one row. Finally, we've got Lacerate as well. Lacerate damages all units on a row by 3. If our opponent's gone really wide, or they think they've got a substantial lead, and they've got maybe 10 units, that's probably an exaggeration, but it's very much possible. If they've got 10 units on a row, then we hit all of them for 3, and that's going to be a massive power swing in the right circumstances. Most of the time, though, you probably want to add Torrential Rain, because it just does constant ticks of damage in the early game. But Lacerate can get you immediate value. Torrential Rain gets you long-term value. Clear Skies helps you out by keeping your value. Next on our silver lists, we've got the Crones. The Crones are actually a pretty decent win condition for monsters, and if you've got the silver space for them, most of the time they are very, very useful. So the Crones, essentially, in this case it's a 6 strength unit that only gets to play on the siege row. And when you deploy the Crone, the Wispess in this case, you get to play the Brewess and the Weavess from your deck. So we get to play the Weavess, and we also get to play the Brewess. So that's a 6 strength, 6 strength, that's an 8 strength, a 6 strength, and another 6 strength, which actually adds to 20 power, which means one of these silver cards in your hand equates to 20 power. So you can imagine if your opponent thinks they have a substantial lead, you only have one card in your hand, they pass thinking you can't possibly have anything in your hand that might actually win. You just play a Brewess, thins out your deck as well, gets all of the Crones out of your deck. That's 20 extra points. It's also 3 targets for the Unseen Elder if you want to have the extra consume value, I suppose, as well. But that is the kind of value that we have. The only downside to running the Crones is the redraws, essentially. If you have more than one of these in your hand at any time, it is a wasted card, and it is essentially dead in your hand. So you want to make sure that you only have one of these 3 in your starting hand, or in future hands at the start of any round, because if you've got more than one of them, then you lose value on it, essentially. So, after that, we've got ourselves Katakan. So this is a 5 strength unit for the melee row. Silver card as well, so we can only run 1 copy. When you deploy it, you get to consume a unit from either graveyard. So this is perfect for any Skellige Reanimate decks. It's perfect for maybe if they're running Nilfgaard and you don't want them to grab extra strength out of your graveyard, for example. If they have their 1 strength unit that resurrects, you don't want them to have an Archgriffin to clear weather, so we might want to consume out one of our own units to preserve point values, essentially, and make sure that they don't get that kind of value. But mostly it's here for the Queen's Guard, it's here for Olgierd, anything that we might not want our opponent to resurrect. Katakan immediately gets rid of and stops that extra bit of value. Getting an Olgierd is absolutely awesome. That's a silver for a silver. We get a boost from their silver as well, which is awesome. So next we've got Cleaver. Cleaver is not an ideal card in this deck, I should mention. This is kind of building on what I've currently got available. So after this I will show you the replacement cards that you should make for these. Cleaver comes with the starter pack though, and he's essentially a 6 strength melee unit that toggles a unit's lock. Now there is a Fiend, I believe it's called, that is 7 strength, but also when it locks a unit, it also damages them by half, which is quite obviously better value than Cleaver. So if you have access to that, then make sure you get yourself a copy. It's 200 scraps if you've got the scraps for it, but when I was building this deck I didn't really want to spend value like that on cards that weren't necessarily going to give me like a super win percentage advantage, essentially. We then have some less than ideal golds as well. Some of them are obviously very good golds, but maybe not so much in this deck. One of them included is Garel. Yet again, comes with the starter kit. 10 strength Witcher, can be agile as well. And when you deploy him, if you are not winning when you deploy him, so after you add the 10 strength to the board, if you're still not winning, then he gets to strengthen himself by 3, which essentially could mean that he is a 13 strength gold unit. It's pretty good value, I won't lie. It's why he's in here. It's kind of for that point swing, and it wins quite often. But there are better consuming golds available to us as well. We'll get to those at the end. After that, we've got Imlerith. Yes, who is an 8 strength wild hunt gold. Agile, so we can play him anywhere on our board, and when you deploy him, you damage an enemy by 4. If the enemy is under frost, damage it by 8 instead. So, essentially, he is a 12-point card at his base value, but he could also be 16 with the extra 4 added if you hit frost. And how do we hit frost? Well, we've got Caranthir. Caranthir is the 1 gold in this deck that almost deserves to be in here just because of his stupid amount of power that he's got. So, 5 strength, less than all of our other golds. However, when you deploy him, you get to move 5 enemies on your opponent's side to the same row that you've placed Caranthir. So if we play him on the melee row, we get to move 5 units onto the melee row on our opponent's side, and then apply frost to that row. If they've not got clear skies, that is devastating. That is at least 5 units that are going to be hit by 1 every single turn. So every single turn, you get essentially a 5-point bit of damage. But that doesn't add on to the additional units that are currently on that row as well. So if they've got no clear weather, Caranthir will win you the game on his own. You can also set up the Lacerate as well for the Water Hag if it comes to it. And the Frost also allows Imlerith to deal the 8 instead of the 4 as well. So he has his uses, and he can get some stupid amount of value out of nowhere, so it's really useful for that kind of thing. Our final gold is Renew. Picked this one up quite recently, just because of the fact that I don't have as many golds. I wanted to make sure that I bought any golds that would fit very well in every deck, and Renew is certainly one of those cards. So, Renew says, resurrect a gold unit from either graveyard. So, we mentioned how powerful Caranthir is. Well, if we Caranthir, they clear weather, job's done. Next round, we can actually renew Caranthir back. Well, now they have to have another clear weather, otherwise Caranthir runs wild. We can also use it to have an extra 10 to 13 strength with Garel. But what we can also do is use our opponent's gold cards against them. And this is why I've got it, for the most part, is the fact that because I'm running on a budget, and my opponents possibly are not running on a budget, it allows me to use their best cards against them. So if they've got a Halmar, which is a 15 strength gold, that spawns a 5 strength on the other side. If that 5 strength's destroyed, you boost Halmar. We can actually renew and use Alzur's Thunder to kill that. So we have the ability to use a lot of gold cards against our opponents as well. Speaking of Alzur's Thunder, Alzur's Thunder is essentially the way that we answer our opponent's stuff. If they've got something that's maybe ticking up, or Axeman, if it's Skellige Weather, for example, we use Alzur's Thunder to get that Axeman off the board before all of the ticks from the Frost get to do the damage that they probably will end up doing. So we're running 2 copies of Alzur's Thunder just as a little bit of interaction with our opponent's deck. So I'm just going to run quickly through all of the golds that you should replace most of these with, as well as maybe any silvers if I can think about them. So I'll see you there. Okay, so we're in the card collection of things that I don't have. So one of the golds that you should probably consider using, it's kind of a bit of a hit or miss kind of thing, is the Regis Higher Vampire. So it's a 6 strength agile unit, so it can go on any row, and when you deploy it, you get to look at 3 random bronze units from your opponent's deck, consume 1, and shuffle the other back. So if you're playing against maybe Nilfgaard Reveal, for example, they'll actually be boosting a lot of cards, like spotters, for example. If you hit a spotter with a Regis Higher Vampire, you might get up to maybe 15 to 17 strength just off that alone. As I mentioned, it is a bit hit or miss because it is 3 random bronze units from your opponent's deck. It's not necessarily going to be the most useful thing all of the time, but if it hits maybe Skellige's Queensguard, if they're playing a Queensguard deck, you've automatically taken 1 out of the deck, and then we've got our Katakhan to take 1 out of the graveyard as well. They're pretty much left with no battle plan anymore. So Regis Higher Vampire is a good neutral card for Consume. Also add to the fact that it is using Consume, which does mean that it boosts our Neckers and anything else like our Behemoths as well that benefits from that. It's essentially all of the golds that I would suggest using. I mean, you could maybe use Gigni. Garel Igni destroys all the highest units on the opposite row if that row totals 20 or more power. It is kind of useful, but it's not having that kind of synergy with the deck that you might want. But he's still always going to be great value. So, if we look to the monsters, we have essentially a few choices. So, the big one is Caran. Caran, when you deploy him, you consume a unit from your hand and then boost itself by an additional 8. So, at the bare minimum, it comes out as a 16 strength gold card. So that is a lot of value. So if you imagine hitting maybe one of your Neckers that are in your hand, which might be up to 10 strength at that point, you're actually adding 18 strength to Caran, which is pretty sweet if I do say so myself. I think that's pretty much about the only golds that you would add. You would add Caran in instead of Garel, essentially. And Imlerith, you could use maybe the Succubus to steal one of your opponent's units as well. So if you stole one of your opponent's units, you could use Ekimara after you've stolen it in order to consume it and carry it over to the next round. That is also an option as well. Succubus is very good for that kind of thing. But that's essentially it. You don't really want to be drawing too many cards with Gales because we are running the Crones, and if you draw a Crone, then you're not in a good spot. So there is that. We don't really want to focus on too much card drawing. And we could also maybe use Caretaker, but that's also a little bit hit and miss as well. So that's essentially the golds. If we look at the silvers, the silver that I mentioned for monsters is the Fiend. It's actually 5 strength, not 7. But when you toggle the lock on a unit with the Fiend instead, if it's an enemy, you damage it by half its power as well. So if they've maybe got a spotter, 18 strength or something like that, you're actually dealing 9 to it and locking it so it doesn't get any further boosts, which is pretty sweet. So that is essentially the thing that you want to do. You could also maybe use the Giant Toad as well, which allows you to consume a card in your hand and then draw the top card of your deck, so you're not really losing too much value. I'm not sure what you replace that with, to be honest. You'd probably have to start eating into your Crone value if you jumped into that too much. I mean, maybe you could drop the Katakhan, but the Katakhan has so much value that you might not want to do that. Anyway, guys, without further ado, I've rambled on long enough. Let's get into the games. See you there.